We're delighted to welcome Susan Woods this evening. And this is how we're going to organize things. First of all, Susan will introduce herself. And then in just a few minutes, she will lead a short practice with us before we move on to talk about her book, MBSR, Protocol, Practice, and Teaching Skills. So, Susan, could you please tell us a little about yourself? What, where, and perhaps you could also tell us a little about your personal journey towards mindfulness.
Yes, well, first of all, thank you, Kay, and thank you, the Friends of Bangor, for asking me to join you over this next hour or so, and to give me an opportunity to talk a little bit about myself, a little bit about my professional pathway with mindfulness, and then also this book that I co-authored with a lovely colleague of mine based in Canada, Pat Rockman. So I think it's always nice to have just a little bit of a sense of who's here, me. And, you know, we've all been so used to working through this medium. So I think we're all getting a little bit more familiar, if not a little tired of the medium as well. And I'm also very aware that for a lot of you, I'm based in the US, I'm on the East Coast of the US. And so your time is not my time. There's 5 hours difference between the East Coast and the UK. And then if you're from Europe, there's another hour, 2-3 hours. So I'm very, very aware of that as well. So I'm going to try and make this as interesting as I possibly can. And I'll look forward very much to giving some time at the very end to some questions and answers. So please feel free to ask lots of questions, and I'll do my best to answer some of them at the end. So a little bit about my background. I've been practicing meditation in the Vipassana tradition and yoga in the Iyengar tradition for many, many years. Really since the early 1980s. So that's a little bit of a while. And I've had 2 professional careers. The first is a British trained physiotherapist. I worked in the UK for 10 years. And the second one is when I moved here to the US, I retrained and went to Columbia University, which is actually based in New York City, and trained and became a licensed clinical social worker, so a psychotherapist. And here in the States, when you become licensed, you have to sit boards in the state that you are actually working with to be able to work as a licensed clinical social worker, which allows you to practice within the therapeutic milieu. And I've been here in the States working as a clinical social worker for very nearly 30 years. And I've worked in a variety of different backgrounds, different settings. In the early 1990s, I think like many people, I came across the work of John Kabat-Zinn at UMass Memorial Hospital. And I was lucky enough to attend the internship program, which was really the only training program that they had at that time. And this was in addition to a 7-day training that John Kabat-Zinn and Saki Santarelli actually ran. But then after that, if you wanted to get a further understanding, further training in terms of mindfulness-based stress reduction, the only thing that was available at that time here in the US was to do an internship at UMass Memorial Hospital, which is what I did. And then later on, I was asked to teach at the Center for Mindfulness at UMass. And so that really sort of continued my understanding, my development as a mindfulness-based teacher. And I guess over the years, I've offered the MBSR program and MBCT, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, in many settings over the years. hospital settings, outpatient settings, businesses, schools, as well as to the general public. And in 2005, I was asked by Zindel Siegel, one of the founders, as you know, of the Mindfulness-Based Cognitive Therapy Program, to co-teach with him the professional MBCT training program that was just getting underway here in the US. And we have taught together annually for many, many years. And that's just been a wonderful, just a wonderful personal and professional relationship. A part of my sort of pathway with the professional side of mindfulness was I was asked to develop curricula and professional training programs, really throughout North America in a variety of different ways, as well as being a consultant on clinical trials that were really looking at studying mindfulness-based programs. And I've also had really the great delight of providing mentoring and supervision to MBSR and MBCT teachers internationally. And that's just been it's just been such a joy for me. And now we sort of, come more sort of into the present moment. And I'm a co-author on 2 professional books. I'd written chapters about professional training and edited books before, but this was a big shift for me in terms of thinking about, writing a book. And I was lucky enough to have 2 wonderful co-authors on the MBCT book, Patricia Rockman and Evan Collins, who are both based in Toronto, Canada. Pat is a physician, but is also the clinical director and the director of professional training at the Center for Mindfulness Studies in Toronto. And then Evan Collins, who's a psychiatrist, is also affiliated with the center. So the 3 of us came together and just had an amazing journey, delving into what we felt were important aspects that were being asked of a mindfulness-based teacher embedded in MBCT. And then this book, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, Protocol, Practice, and Teaching Skills, that was just published. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second or two.
Okay.
So it's time to go. Okay, I'm nearly done, Kay. So
no, you're good with.
Oh,
very,
right?
very, very interesting. Absolutely fine, Susan.
Okay, I thought that was
your time is ours.
Okay, I thought that was my time. Like, okay, now that Kay's going to be my timekeeper, so this is amazing and really helpful because I can go on talking. So just laterally to finish this off, right now, I mean, I've held a number of roles and functions professionally, but I'm now currently a senior faculty member at the Center for Mindfulness Studies in Toronto, Canada. So how do I sort of fold this into the personal practice, the personal integration of my own practice? So I think really what this is that what's really central here is my interest in how the practice of mindfulness informs our daily lives, and then how that influences our teaching of mindfulness-based programs, regardless of the setting, whether it's a medical setting, clinical setting, educator, yoga teacher, community outreach leader, or in business. So the question for me, the heart here is our practice, our personal practice, informing our daily lives? And if so, how does that translate into our professional lives? Rather than the other way, which is, here's a program, let's teach it, and then let's see how we can get into the practice. Now, both pathways, I think, are wonderful, but I think training centers, it behoves training centers to really have a focus on personal practice. And my understanding about the professional training centers that I know, they all have this wonderful emphasis on personal practice. The other thing, just to give you a sort of little sidebar, is that I was asked to be a part of a community Dharma leaders training that was being run by Spirit Rock Meditation Center, which is actually based in California. This is a center that was founded by Jack Cornfield and others. So that was another wonderful way to immerse myself in the teachings of the Dharma in its bigger sense. And then how can I bring that into the field of mindfulness in a way that speaks to the lay language of contemporary mindfulness? And then the other thing, just to let you know, is that I don't identify as a Buddhist. So here I am as a Dharma teacher. And if we have time, I'd be very happy to talk a little bit about that reflection in terms of that statement. Okay, Kay, how are we doing?
I think we're very good, Susan. Okay. And if it's agreeable to you, perhaps we could just spend a few minutes if you'd like to lead us in a very short practice.
Yes.
So over to you, Susan.
Okay, yeah. So let's just sort of park all of what I've just spoken to as best we can. And again, reflect on how to encourage that transition into a practice, which is both a personal attentiveness to an inner world, as well as we've now got a community of people in a variety of different countries, different regions, which is, just so precious. So I'm going to get myself into a comfortable position, and I would encourage you to do the same, whether that's to stand up, if that feels something that the body is really asking you to do, or even if you would prefer to lie down on the floor, but to really take the time to adopt a posture that, to your very best ability in this moment, can really encourage this sense of an inner attunement. So I'm just going to look at the clock to my left. Okay, all right. So taking a few moments, and to encourage this inner attentiveness, we can allow the eyes to close. Equally, we can soften the gaze. And it can be really helpful to spend a few moments as we settle into this posture, this stillness, to locate ourselves in our bodies, to locate ourselves in our bodies. The contact points that the body is making with the floor, chair, cushion, with itself. Sensing the length and breadth and weight of the body. Checking in with the muscles of the face, the head resting easily on the neck, shoulders relaxed, spine gently lifted, body easy. As we attend and tune into the sensations of the body, it's likely that we become aware of the movement of breathing. So we can notice that movement of the breath. Noticing the physical sensations of the breath. Nothing to change about the breath, this sense of resting awareness on the movement of breathing. As we do this, one of the natural things about the mind is the mind becomes involved. Maybe thoughts. There may be an emotional valence of some sort, tiredness, frustration, irritation, ease, joy, contentment. There may be sounds in the environment. For this practice, when we notice this movement, acknowledging the sensations that are present, we can then gently return to allowing the breath and the physical sensations of breathing to be in the forefront of our interest and our consciousness. Having this focus, in this case, on the breathing, helps to steady the mind over time. In a few moments, we'll be coming to this practice ending in this way, making a transition from an inner attentiveness to now including the external environment in which we sit or stand or are lying. And so allowing the eyes to open, to widen the gaze, and to feel free to move around, to stretch, and just to take a few moments to recognize that over these last few moments, we've been able to take a pause. We've been able to tune in to a sense of our own bodies, our own minds, our own hearts. A connection to everything that we are and everything that we bring to all that we do.
Thank you so much, Susan. We were in such good hands during that practice. And I think that everyone is excited to move on and to hear you talk about what you have described as a living document, which is your book. Perhaps you could tell us a little about the story, the intention behind the book to begin.
Yeah, thank you, Kay. Okay, so the intention behind the book, I think there were a number of important directional forces, if I can call them that, that really manifested themselves in Pat and I coming together and writing this book. We actually very much wanted Evan Collins, who had written the MBCT book with us, to join us, but unfortunately ill health prevented him from joining us. And but he was just wonderful in terms of reviewing the book from time to time and giving us some just wonderful pointers, which is always lovely to have, you know, another person, another view in terms of what you're writing, because you get very into the process of writing. And sometimes it's helpful to have, in fact, actually not sometimes, always, it's helpful to have a couple of people on the outside taking a good hard look. I think if I was to try and focus on probably one of the most important influences in terms of this book, it would be that it came from a place of my experience with teaching and training future teachers of MBSR, my experience in terms of leading and facilitating many, many different iterations of the MBSR program in a variety of different settings. And also the joy of having colleagues, senior colleagues, if I can call them that, in the field, who were also training future teachers and had worked in a variety of different settings. And so really in conversations that happened over the years before, sometimes months before, the book sort of came into a sense of, yes, this is something that both Pat and I wanted to do. What we were seeing in the field was that, and I'm sure all of you are a party to this, is there's really some confusion about what MBSR is, which is interesting because it's been around for such a long time. And a lot of this confusion was around a sort of a structured approach, one that would talk about developing a curriculum, a protocol as part of the landscape of writing the book. And so we knew that what we wanted to do was to provide some kind of curriculum protocol which would address session by session the modularity of the 8-week program. So we knew that that was going to be a part of the book. I think the other thing we knew was that we really wanted to address mindful embodied presence of the teacher, and then also the verbal manifestation of that, the overt manifestation of that, which is inquiry. So we knew that those two pieces were going to be a part of the book. What we didn't know was how they were going to unfold in the arc of the book. And so one of the things that for me has always been of interest, and I think it's really how my mind works, and I think lots of other people's minds, it's not just my mind, which is that where we've been, so where we have been, always influences us in a variety of different ways to where we are now, the present moment. Okay. And where we are now is going to take us into what's going to happen next, the future. So that pathway, we Pat and I talked about that, and we really felt that would be a good way to start thinking about the arc of the MBSR book. So that's actually what we did. So there's 5 parts to the book. And I'll stop there, Kay. I think you might want to ask me a question.
Yeah. No. I was just going to say, it seems to me that you're describing to us the shape of the book.
Yes.
And its timeline, and the timeline it actually focuses on as well.
Yep.
So yeah, I think, I know that you said that, you know, teachers need resources to develop skills, and also that the protocol, the curriculum is a kind of safety net for quality, as you say. Yep. But it's only part of the story.
Yes.
And maybe this more intuitive, intangible part of the story is something that we would certainly like to hear about as well, I think.
Yes. So one of the things that I think any of us who are involved in writing about the field of mindfulness, particularly I think in terms of addressing mindfulness-based programs, is that we're really holding this tension. And that tension, I guess I would call the medicalization of mindfulness. So if you think about how a sort of medical model approaches mindfulness, or the understanding of suffering, let me back out and just say it's actually the understanding of suffering, that would be somewhat different from how those of us who are coming from the mindfulness practice might have an understanding of suffering. And over the last few years, to my joy, those two aspects of mindfulness-based programs are actually coming together more and more. But I think that one of the things that we really wanted to try and identify in the book and discuss in the book was really the sort of the heart of what a mindfulness-based program is asking a teacher, but not to lose sight of the research, adaptations in the field, how we meet different populations, how we meet different cultures, which we address in one of the parts of the book, so that the extrinsic, I guess, model would be, here's a protocol curriculum as a resource, and there's lots of good reasons for doing that, particularly in terms of research. So if you look at the research which we did, obviously for this book, and I think all mindfulness-based teachers need to have an understanding of the research, you will see that very rarely do any of the research articles talk about what kind of MBSR program they had studied. So that's an issue in terms of generalizing to, you know, a general population. I think the other piece is that if you're going to train teachers and you're embedded in an educational system, some kind of organization that needs to have generated some kind of outcome in terms of the skills that a mindfulness-based teacher, we hope, would have, so MBSR teacher in this case, then you need to have some kind of structure that you can replicate over a number of trainees, so that at the end of that process, however long that process is, you can say, this person, you can sign off on that person and feel very comfortable that A, they're not going to do any harm, but B, they know the structure of what they're teaching. And I've said to so many of, you know, the folks that I've worked with, you know, after you've been certified, I don't know what you're going to do, but over this 2.5-year process, or 3 years, or however long it is that, you know, I have the joy of working with you, we're really going to use this structure to uncover what's underneath in terms of teaching mindfulness in this genre, in a mindfulness-based program. Does that address the question, Kay?
Yeah, I think it addresses it beautifully. I think we hear so much clarity and wisdom and joy in your words. I think everyone would like to hear a little bit more, perhaps.
Okay.
I know that you're looking to the future. You know, your work spans from the pioneers in mindfulness
Yeah.
to looking to the future. And I know that you're saying that maybe the time is ripe for an overhaul.
Well,
Perhaps you could bring us to this future vision.
okay.
Perhaps
Okay.
we could get to that point as well.
Right. Okay. Well, so the future. I get asked this question a fair amount because I think we're interested, right? If you're you're going through a training program, I mean, you want to know what your future is going to be like in terms of, obviously being able to teach the program. But the bottom line is here, I mean, who knows, really. Having said that, and that's a little bit of a sort of facetious who knows, and I don't mean it to be that way. What I can tell you from my experience, and I've been teaching mindfulness-based stress reduction since I think 1996, I think. Yes, 1996. Is that when I first started, you didn't know, people didn't know a lot about mindfulness. And so it was a very different environment, a very different setting. And I had to do a lot of education with administrators, businesses, hospital, continuing ed programs, etc., so about what mindfulness was. So that was interesting because I think it allowed a lot of us who were teaching at that point, and there weren't that many of us here in North America, that it was making us take a very deep dive into how did we understand mindfulness and how were we going to tell people about it. And I know that 1990s, early 2000s, mindfulness has just taken off, and wonderfully so. So we now have many wonderful international training centers that are providing quality trainings for future teachers. The research has taken off. And mindfulness is in the public domain. I'm trying to be as sort of succinct as I possibly can. We have wonderful adaptations of MBSR. So the mindfulness-based relapse prevention program, which was Alan Marlett's, he was the founding member of that. And then MBCT, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, came quickly after that. And subsequent to that, we've had other adaptations. So now we have not just MBSR, but we have all these other wonderful programs, which is another rich resource for the field of mindfulness. So this, I think, is really, really good, really, really good. The tension, and this is what I say to all my trainee teachers, is that people are now coming into your programs. I mean, they're coming into my programs, and they're pretty well informed about mindfulness, and there's some misinformation out there. So we have to address that up front with our participants when they come in, and that, of course, is probably another big conversation. But that's very important for us to do, to address that. So you can see that from not many people knowing about mindfulness to now it's out in the public domain, and our participants, our patients, are coming in, and they know a fair amount about mindfulness. So we need to check in with them and make sure that some of what they've read, or some of their information, may not be quite what our program is going to deliver in the way that they think. I think that's very, very important. I think for future teachers, I think we are We're talking about risks and benefits, and this is the work of Willoughby Britton, who many of you may know. She's been doing some really wonderful research about the risks and benefits. We now have the work of Treleaven in terms of being trauma-informed, trauma-sensitive in terms of how we work with those populations. So it's a rich matrix that we now have in terms of our understanding about how to reach out to different cultures, different populations, and so on. I think the other thing about the future, and I think all centers are addressing this, is that when I started teaching, it was relatively easy to recruit for my groups because I was embedded in a hospital setting, so that did make it easier for referrals. It's not easy to recruit unless you are embedded in some kind of organization or institution that's going to help you. So it's going to take time. I think the other thing is to understand that you're not going to make a lot of money, and this isn't something that's going to sustain enough money to look after yourself in a way that I think we would all want to, make sure that we do look after ourselves. So I think that that's really important, because teaching a mindfulness-based program is always going to be an adjunct, I think, to whatever else you're doing. So that begs the question, are you up for that? Because, it takes such a lot of effort and energy and intention to get a program up and running. How do you recruit? You have to have patience. And then eventually, once your community starts to know that you're running a mindfulness-based program, the word gets out, and then it gets a lot easier. But sometimes it can take quite a while to get enough people to come to a program. So there is a tension there in our future, which I think, certainly the centers that I'm working with, we're addressing that with our trainees who are coming in, because we want them to know what they're getting into. So being an informed consumer, I guess, would be another way of saying it.
So you give them a very clear picture, and let's say give them some idea that there is a kind of a marketing effort, because in some ways, I guess if we can call it a market, has reached such a level of maturity. As you say, there's a plethora of types of courses, of different approaches, and then of providers, the mindfulness teachers.
Yes, yeah. And I think, Kay, that so one of the things that we can encourage is to, if there's another teacher in your community, in your area, to reach out to them and to see if there's some way that you can combine your teaching, right? And I think, that's the future, because I think you're right. I mean, I don't think the market's saturated. I come from a real belief of abundance rather than scarcity. But I think in that we need to be smart on our own behalf and think about, okay, well, maybe, my community of, 4,000, it may not be able to sustain 2 teachers. So hopefully, if there's somebody already teaching, or that somebody's interested in teaching, maybe you can combine forces and teach together. Yeah. And there's lots of love. I mean, it's wonderful to be able, it can be wonderful to teach with somebody else. I mean, that can bring its own challenges, but it usually works quite well. Yeah.
A kind of team teaching approach.
Yeah.
And and multiplying 2 becomes actually as if it's 1 to the force of 3. Huh?
There you go. Yes.
You grow your strengths.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's very, very inspiring, Susan, and I'm sure that there are lots of questions, and I think maybe it's time to move on and to ask Dorothy, what questions do we have, Dorothy?
Good evening, Sue and Kay. So our first pre-question was around, can you speak a little about the any adaptations you've made in your MBSR courses over the years?
So adaptations in terms of cultural differences or demographics, populations, would that be the case, Dorothy?
Yes,
Isn't
sort
it?
of culture, demogrations, but also I think just anyone who comes through the door, how
Yeah.
best to serve them in the community that you work within.
Right. Okay. Well, very early on in my teaching of MBSR, I was asked to teach in a town, actually a city, but in a particular part of the city that was a very different culture, very different demographic from me. I'm a white Caucasian woman who identifies as she, her, or hers. So this is early on, and so this is. So I went in with all the zeal that often happens when you're just learning. You know, you've just learned about MBSR and you're very excited to bring it, and you've been asked, etc., etc. So in I walked, and this was in a community in environment, in a setting that was in a big building that had a variety of different offices and missions, but it was all about working with the local community. And this community was Puerto Rican, Cuban, and African American. So I had a chat with the administrator who was asking me to come in and run the class, and I made some small changes, but not a lot, because frankly, the structure of the MBSR was something I was holding on to because it gave me some safety. Anyway, so in I walk for the first session, and as we all know, the first session, you do your introductions, you go around, they introduce each other, and then you do the raisin and you chat about the raisin, and then you do the body scan and you chat about that, and then you set home assignments. Well, so we did introductions and the group, and I noticed there were babies, there were children, there were grandmothers, there were doors banging and crashing. And I knew that this was not going to end or even begin in the way that I had anticipated. So fortunately, I've been practicing for a while. So I went, okay, in a way, I give up because this isn't going to be how I imagine it to be. And so what happened with that was that I had to do a complete, almost 360 degrees, and look at all the different modules in all the different sessions and work out which ones I felt important to teach and which ones I could shorten and which ones I could let go of, and understand that it was going to be noisy. So meditation wasn't going to be quiet. Well, that was interesting because actually, if you're a householder, you're not on retreat, and you're practicing at home or at the office, it's pretty noisy. It can be noisy. So I had to then, not had to, but it really allowed me to reflect on, okay, what are the important, or what can I understand are the important constituents embedded in each session. I'm going to have to shorten them, and I'm going to have to include, to the very best of my ability, this culture. Now, what I did for the second iteration was there was a person who took the class, and he was really interested in learning about how he could bring this to his community. So in the second iteration, I had him as my co-teacher. So this was, not something that had been sort of talked about in terms of if you're going to be a teacher, you have to go through training, et cetera, et cetera. I said, no, I really need somebody who's embedded in the community to be by my side, because this person knows this community and this culture a lot better than I do, right? So that was the first lesson that I learned. I think and here in the States, right now, we have a lot of conversation about race and about the history of race and white privilege. And it's time, and it's a good thing to have, and it's difficult. But I think if you don't know the culture and you're not from that culture, the first thing you have to think about is, how can I bring in a community member or people who are in the community and have a discussion with them about what they're looking for and what I can bring. So right there is going to be a huge adaptation. What I would say about adapting, though, is if you're training, don't be too quick to adapt first. So train, yes. If you're from a different culture, which we're now trying to be, we're trying to reach out to communities that have not been well served by our training programs, because the training programs are expensive, and there are lots of other reasons why people can't come to these training programs. But I think we want to be very sensitive and aware that we are working with populations that we really don't know anything about. And therefore, how can we, as teachers, facilitate what we know and then bring in the community with what they know as well? So I think it's that. Other adaptations in terms of working with businesses, working in the educational field. I've worked in schools, with teachers, with children, educate. I mean, there's lots of now programs that can address that very, very, very well. Working with businesses, you've got to be really, really careful. HR, you're usually brought in by HR. HR has one intention. The administration has another intention. The employees have another intention. You've got to make sure that what you're doing in the business environment is not going to replicate the power hierarchy, right? So that begs confidentiality, et cetera, et cetera. So it's this huge, huge subject, adaptation. The other adaptation is, what do you do after the 8-week program? And I think that was one of the questions, Dorothy, was that right? Yeah,
it was, yes.
She's
one of our
nodding
questions.
Yeah. Okay, I can tell you what doesn't work because, I've done it and others have done it. So one of the things that will happen after your 8-week program, and you've seen this if you're already teaching, is that they're very enthusiastic. I mean, they just want to keep going, and they want to keep going with you. So watch out for that, because no, it's not. It is about you, but it's not about you. It's about them being launched into their own practice. However, there are things that you can do to facilitate that. So one of the things is, people try to do like drop-in, once a week drop-in after the 8 weeks. Doesn't work. It works for a little bit and then it just doesn't work. Others are monthly, coming together on a monthly basis. Now you might get a few, you'll get some people the first month, second month less, and no, third month, no. What does seem to work is something really borrowed from cognitive behavioral therapy, which is booster sessions. And you really need you need to have taught enough 8-week classes to be able to run this. So typically you probably want at least 2 years teaching 2 8-week programs before you, I think, really offer a booster session, but you can try and do it before. And that is 6 weeks weekly, 1.5 hours. And what people want is to replicate what they had in the actual MBSR program. So you come together, you say hello, you welcome each other, you do a practice, you talk about the practice, and then you talk about how the practice is informing their daily life. So this is the behavioral activation. I mean, I'm a trained CBT therapist. We all know that you can get insights with practice, and that's wonderful. But if they don't translate into behavioral change in the environment, it's not so good. It's just not going to stick. So that idea of coming together, you've got community, you've got Sangha, a practice, inquiry about the practice, and then a discussion about how is practice informing every day your life, how are things going, relationships, work, children, family. Yeah, so that seems to work, doing those booster sessions, 6 weeks, hour and a half. And there seems to be a fair amount of traction with doing that. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, our next question is from Vanessa, and she's very interested in around your reflections about being a Dharma teacher, but not identifying yourself as a Buddhist. Just to explore this in more detail.
Yeah, I walked into that one, didn't I? Yes. Okay. All right. So, I was raised in Asia. I was raised in Malaysia, and Malaysia at that time is all part of the British sort of colonial past, which has its history. But I had a Chinese Ama who was a Buddhist, a Confucian, and I had a Malay Ama. This is like a nanny who was Muslim, and I was raised religion really wasn't a big factor in my home. When I returned to England, I went to a Quaker school, right, and learned a lot about reflection, silence, from really being immersed in it, and really thoughtful about that. And then in my 20s, I took 6 months and traveled throughout Europe into Asia. So I went into India and Europe, it was Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Nepal, Thailand, and then finally back into Malaysia. So I was immersed in a variety of different cultures and religions, right? And saw a lot of identification, right? National identification, but also identification with religion, which is fine. But it brings its own headaches, sadly, right? So I think in my core, I resist being identified by a group. I think that would be the best way to say it. And I think of the practice of mindfulness, the practice of insight meditation, vipassana, as being bigger than any religion. I see it in a wider context, in that Buddha Dharma context. The mystery of mind, emotion, human heart, that these teachings are available to all of us, irrespective of our religious affiliations, spiritual affiliations, etc., etc. So I like to try and hold a wider context. And when I was asked to be a part of this community Dharma leaders program, they knew. I mean, they knew enough about them. I mean, they know me. That the way I was going to teach was from that concept, in that way. And I think for me, it gives me more freedom. It allows me to move more easily into different contexts, different spiritual traditions, without having to be defensive of anything at all, but more about the engagement of a conversation. Can we have a conversation? So hopefully we seem to we've lost wish. Oh,
so
lovely.
Thank you so much.
There she is.
Here I am. Very practical, very wide-reaching, fascinating, and unfortunately, as it always happens, time has been passing. So maybe Dorothy, if we do have one last short question for Susan.
Well, we've got so many wonderful questions, but I'll try and pick a quick one. I think maybe just to touch a little, Susan, on the inquiry process is bringing up a lot of interest, as always, in questions.
You know, that I would love to. I would really love to spend a lot of time talking about inquiry, because this is the heart of the matter for me. It really is. It's that, and in mindful and body presence is just the heart. So that's it, really. I mean, that's the answer. It's the heart of the matter. It's the heart of teaching, and it comes over the years. I would tell you, when I first started teaching way back in 1996, I didn't have a clue what inquiry was. I mean, other than to have a conversation and hope that I didn't say anything terrible or lead them down, you know, a path that was very unhelpful. So it'll come. I think the first thing that we want to think about when we walk into a room is, what are we bringing with us? Right? Are we bringing in our role and function, whatever that is, or are we doing our very best to meet people in a way where they can be seen and heard, and where we can be seen and heard? So in other words, there's a reciprocity in the subjective space between us at all times. If we can begin to work in that way, that begins to lessen the hold of who we think we are. Now, this all sounds a bit sort of esoteric, but it's asking you to be to the very best of your ability to trust the process of inquiry and not worry about saying the right thing. I mean, and you know, it's a wonderful, wonderful way of having conversations with people who are coming into your group. Yeah, I'd like to spend more, but I'm not going to be able to in the time. I don't feel good about that, but thank you for the question. I mean, that was a lovely question to answer, as all the questions were. I mean, these are great questions.
Thank you so much, Susan, and thank you for all the questions.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent session. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Susan.